Hello everyone and welcome to episode 14 of Wishing Stars and Mickey Bars. In this week's episode, we'll be talking about the value resorts at Walt Disney World and answering some of your questions about them. So stay tuned.
We are Robert and Alyssa, also known as Here with the Ears. We lived the entire year of 2019 in the Walt Disney World resorts, sharing our experiences and adventures on social media and YouTube. Wishing Stars and Mickey Bars is our weekly show where we share tips, stories, and more about our year living in the resorts and our continued Disney adventures. On this week's episode, we're talking about the value resorts at Walt Disney World, which are the least expensive resorts on Disney property. Now, there are 5 of these resorts, or maybe 6, depending on how you count them, and they are Pop Century Resort and Art of Animation, which are sister resorts. You have the All-Star Resorts, All-Star Music, All-Star Sports, and All-Star Movies, and you also have Fort Wilderness Campground, if you want to count that one. That one's kind of fuzzy because the cabins at Fort Wilderness are definitely a moderate.
Yes.
But the campsites are more along the value price point, assuming you already have an RV, which is kind of expensive, or a trailer, or you're willing to sleep in a tent beside your car. So, I mean, you could count Fort Wilderness in here, but I think we're going to leave that one for the moderates because we're going to talk about it with the cabins. So we'll leave that one for that episode.
Yeah, and a lot of things they have that they offer at Fort Wilderness are more on the moderate side. So we're going to stick with the 5 that we've mentioned already and go over those. And there are some generalities about these. There are a few main differences between the value resorts and moderate and deluxe resorts. The first being that the rooms are actually slightly smaller. They do sleep up to 4 adults, but this can get kind of cramped because of the size of the room. The exception to this are the family suites at Art of Animation and All-Star Music, which sleep up to 6 adults.
Another big difference in these resorts and the moderate and deluxe resorts is the lack of a table service option. These resorts only have a single food option. It is going to be the food court in the main building by the front desk and the gift shop and all that. They might have a pool bar where you can get drinks and things or maybe be able to order something quick service there, but usually it's pulled from the same kitchen as the food court. So your food options are a little more limited here, which if you're not going to be eating at the resort all the time, that's not as big of a deal, especially if you like to go to Disney Springs for dinner or whatever. But if you like having those sit-down meals, just be aware you're not going to have those at the value resorts.
Another difference between the values and moderate and deluxes is the value resorts do not have a pool slide. Now, this may not seem like a big deal to some people, but I enjoy the pool slides a lot. I have videoed myself going down every single one of them at Walt Disney World, so I really enjoy the pool slides. Again, that's not a huge difference. That's not to say the pools aren't fun. It's just something to note.
And the last main difference is that the activities at the value resorts tend to be a little more scaled back. Not a ton. There is still plenty to do there, but they don't quite have as much as the deluxe resorts. So for example, not all of the value resorts have marshmallow roasting in the evenings, which right now no one has marshmallow roasting because it's canceled for 2020 and eventually they're going to bring it back. But when they do bring it back, not all the value resorts have it, or they may not have it every night. Now, they do have movies under the stars, they do have poolside activities, and they have tie-dye, which of course is a paid activity. But as far as the other paid activities or games, things like that, they don't quite have as much of that at those resorts. So it's something to be aware of. If you're spending a lot of time at the resort, you may not have quite as much to do with the activities cast.
Now, getting more into the specifics of each value resort, we're going to start with Pop Century. Mainly because it's our favorite and, well, it's the only one open right now.
It's the only one open.
Art of Animation is scheduled to open on November 1st, but we do not have an opening date for any of the All-Star resorts right now. Now, Pop Century is our favorite for several reasons. One, it was recently remodeled, and we love the new remodel.
The new rooms look so good.
Yes.
And I love what they did with the space in the room. They put a lot of little storage places. They put a lot of space under the bed for storage and the little closet unit. Like, they really utilize the space. It's still a very small room, but they utilize the space really well. It's like IKEA came in and designed the room for them or something.
Yes. And we love the Murphy bed because, especially because there's only 2 of us, we don't need that extra bed down. So we really enjoy that that doesn't have to be down when we're in there.
It makes the room feel a lot bigger.
It does. And the other thing I love is they have really fun activities. The main one being the scavenger hunt. I'm a huge fan of scavenger hunts. And so they have a great one there. And it lets you kind of see the resort and check things out that you wouldn't have otherwise known were there.
And you get a slap bracelet as the prize or other 90s themed prizes. So, you know, I think the slap bracelet was kind of a cool prize. I also like that they have multiple pools there. The quiet pool over in the 80s and 90s section, the computer pool. I don't just like it because I'm a total nerd and love computers, but I also like it because it's it's kind of a lane pool. It's just a square pool, really. So people don't go there. So it's usually pretty darn empty when you go over to the computer pool versus the main pool, the hippy dippy pool. It's shaped like a flower. It's usually very busy. And then if you go over to the bowling pool, that's a lot of fun too because it's shaped like a bowling pin and they got 50s music, but it tends to be a little busier. So I like to go over there to the quieter pool and kind of stay away from everybody and have my own spot to myself over there. So that's another perk there. I think one other thing about Pop Century that I really like is the Skyliner too. It's a big advantage if you're going to Epcot and Hollywood Studios versus having to wait for buses, because even though the line does tend to get really long first thing in the morning when the parks are opening, it moves so fast because the Skyliner moves a ton of people per hour. It's crazy.
So that is one thing to note, though. If you have someone in your party who's afraid of heights, the Skyliner is not an advantage at this resort. So that's just something to consider. We actually have several family members who aren't fans of the Skyliner. So you want to be considerate of everyone in your party.
And you don't have bus options to those parks if you're staying there because they have the Skyliners, unless, of course, there's inclement weather or something like that. So that is definitely something to consider. We're not afraid of heights, so we love the Skyliner.
We do. We love the Skyliner. But one other reason we love Pop Century is honestly the nostalgia factor. That is where we went on our honeymoon. It's where we went for several years after that. So we've just really gotten to know Pop Century and that resort there, a lot of the cast members there. So we love that resort. We love staying there just because there's so much nostalgia there. And I know many people have the same feeling at other resorts. There's your home resort, your favorite resort. And so that one is kind of Pop Century for us.
Yeah, well, at least it was until we bought into DVC. And now I am all in with Copper Creek. But we'll talk about that in a future episode when we talk about the Deluxe Villas, the DVC resorts, and the Deluxe resorts. But yeah, at Pop Century, if I had to pick a value, it's going to be my favorite, which we've actually stayed there since it reopened because we wanted to go and check it out after the reopening. And we did stay in a preferred pool view. We also remembered that we don't like pool view because when you have a pool view at the value resorts, it tends to be a little noisy in the afternoon, especially with poolside activities and kids swimming and stuff. So we like to book a preferred room and pay the extra $10 a night or so at Pop Century and even at the All-Star resorts as well, because it gets you closer to the front, it gets you closer to transportation. But I don't necessarily go for that pool view at Pop Century because all the extra noise is just not worth the extra money to me.
And even with less people at the resort right now, it was still very loud. They play a lot of music, which is fun and it keeps it exciting. They do poolside activities. There's a lot of people there. And that's so fun and exciting, and we love that part of it. But if you have things you're going to do in the afternoon, if you're going to take a nap, if you want to come back during the day, it's just very loud in your room. So that's just something to consider. Depending on your schedule, you may not want to be poolside for that.
Now, across the water, we have Art of Animation. There is a lake, hourglass lake, separating the two resorts, and the Skyliner is right there in the middle of that lake. So over there at Art of Animation, they're not open, like you said. They're supposed to open November 1st, so fingers crossed for that one. But it's a very different resort because I honestly wouldn't consider Art of Animation a value resort, even though Disney does classify it as value, because the only rooms there that are that same kind of inexpensive price point are the Little Mermaid rooms. And all the rest of the rooms, 7 out of the 10 buildings, are family suites. And those family suites are priced closer to a moderate or even a deluxe price point, depending on the time of year. So Art of Animation, technically a value, not really what I would consider a value, but we're going to talk about it because it is in the list.
Well, and because all the amenities are leaning towards the value amenities, so that is something to consider. The pool doesn't have the slide, there's no table service, so it does lean towards the value side on that aspect of it, but the price point is not on the value side, in our opinion.
Now, this resort was also recently remodeled. In fact, very recently, they just finished the final rooms there in the last few weeks. So all of the rooms at Art of Animation have been completely refurbished. They didn't change the theming. So they have Cars buildings, they have Lion King buildings, and they have Finding Nemo buildings. Those are all the themes for the family suites. And then they have the Little Mermaid rooms that are just the regular rooms, about the same size as the rooms at Pop Century. Now, the Little Mermaid rooms are great because they have this Little Mermaid theming, and it's just a regular price point for the value resorts. But the downside is they're pretty far away. Now, I gotta say, someone asked me the other day about what I thought between Pop Century and Little Mermaid rooms because it's very similar price point. If you book a standard room at Pop Century, you could be just as far away as you would be in the Little Mermaid rooms because they're basically mirror image resorts. So it's kind of hard to say that Pop Century is better unless you're booking a preferred room because you're going to walk a long way if you're in a standard room.
But especially if you have a little one who loves Little Mermaid, then the Little Mermaid rooms are definitely worth it because they are so well themed. And with the new upgrade, the beds are now queen size instead of full. That's a huge plus, especially if you've got 2 kids sharing a bed, or honestly, even 2 adults.
That's true.
That extra space makes a big difference. So we love the new remodels there at the suites and at the Little Mermaid rooms. And again, as long as you don't mind walking a little bit, it's totally fine to stay in the Little Mermaid rooms. But at the end of the day, if you've been walking all day in the parks, it can be a long walk if you're exhausted pushing a stroller. So that's just something to consider.
And we do also like the family suites over there at Art of Animation, but with only 2 of us, not really a reason to book a 6-person room unless we're doing it for a room tour or something, but we already have room tours of all those remodeled rooms up on the YouTube channel. Go check those out. So we like the rooms, but we just don't stay there very often. Now, I will say the Finding Nemo are probably our favorite family suites, partly because the theming is really cute,
They're beautiful.
but also because they are technically the preferred section. They're closer to the front. They're the main buildings right there by the main pool and closest to the Skyliner as well. So for the few extra dollars a night, we would probably book the Finding Nemo suites because we like the theming and also because it's closer to the front. And speaking of the pools, we love the pools and their theming over at Art of Animation.
Especially the big blue pool, which is the main pool there. It's so well themed. So it's Finding Nemo, which is just adorable. And that is where you'll find the poolside activities. Now, most of the guests are going to go to this pool here because, again, it's so cool and so awesome. But we actually love the quiet pools for the theming and because they're quiet. So my personal favorite is the Cars Quiet Pool because it is really quiet and the theming there is so cute. All the little areas where you can sit actually are underneath cones. Now, one thing we did learn about this last year, we were doing some work and it started raining. We were under the cones, thought we were good. As it turns out, they made them like real life cones. So there are actually holes in the top.
Yep, so it just rains right inside on top of you while you're sitting in there.
So we learned that the hard way last year.
Way, yeah.
But it was a fun memory. Obviously, we still remember that because of what happened. So we ran to our rooms really fast during that rainstorm. But they also have a quiet pool on the Little Mermaid side. Again, themed to the Little Mermaid. Very well themed, very cute. And again, those quiet pools tend to stay pretty quiet.
And Art of Animation's food court is actually our favorite food court out of any of the resorts. It has the best selection, seems to have the widest variety. The food's really good, and they seem to have a lot of dessert options too, which I'm a big fan of eating dessert, and even eating dessert first. But I like that they have a lot of options there.
One thing to note, because Pop Century and Art of Animation are sister resorts and connected by a bridge, you can easily walk over there and take advantage of the food court if you're staying at Pop Century, and vice versa. So you can share any of the activities, any of the amenities, except the big blue pool at Art of Animation. That is only for Art of Animation guests. But you can share anything else, so we loved going over there and getting food if we were staying at Pop Century. Or sometimes one of them will have a movie night and the other one wouldn't. So we would just go back and forth between the two, depending on what we wanted to do.
Yeah, so I do like that they share that. And of course, you also have access to the Skyliner from Art of Animation because it's there on that bridge. So it's a great resort to stay at. Again, not the most economical unless you're staying in the Little Mermaid rooms, but really a great option.
And heading over to the All-Star Resorts, we have All-Star Sports, All-Star Movies, and All-Star Music. Now, there's not a lot of differences between these 3 resorts, but there are a few slight ones, so we're going to point those out.
And they are also sister resorts, kind of like Pop Century and Art of Animation. So a lot of the things there are shared, and there's really nothing that's off limits between the resorts there. One thing that we do need to point out, though, is the buses are also shared sometimes. Yeah. So if you're staying at All-Star Movies, you may have difficulty getting a bus because during non-peak times, they'll start a bus at All-Star Sports, then go to All-Star Music, then go to All-Star Movies. And by the time it gets to movies, it might be full. Or if they're dropping off, you're going to be the last ones dropped off after the other stops. So it's just something to keep in mind. If you're at those resorts and you really want to be first on the bus line, no matter what, you're going to have to pick sports. And if you don't really care, then movies is a great option as well. And we'll get into the details of all the individual All-Star resorts now.
We're going to start with All-Star Movies. Even though it is last in the bus line, we still love that one. It's actually our favorite All-Star for a few different reasons, and I'm going to let you tell the first one.
So the first reason we love All-Star Movies is that they have a secret menu. The secret menu in the food court is not just any secret menu where like, oh, if you know, you know, right? It's one of those where it's actually a big deal. You go over to this one specific window there, and it's the burger window. I forget what they call it there, but the burger window, you walk up and you tell the cast member, hey, I'd like to see the secret menu. And then they bring out this big silver case that they open up like all secretive and everything and open it up, and inside is a Viewmaster, like the old,
Yeah, they still have one. Would you believe it?
and you click through the Viewmaster to see the items on the secret menu, and there's 3 or 4 items on there, and it was like the most fun experience. And you tell them like, oh, okay, I'll take a secret menu number 3 or whatever, and they make your food. And the one item that I get off the secret menu every time we go there, because it's ridiculous, over the top, delicious, and terrible for you, clogging your arteries and everything else, is a cinnamon roll burger. It is a big cinnamon roll like they sell in their bakery, cut in half with a cheeseburger on it. It is amazing.
It's crazy,
Absolutely
guys.
amazing.
It's crazy.
Only thing that comes close is the beignet burger over at French Quarter, which we'll cover in next week's episode, I'm sure, because I also love that burger. So, cinnamon roll burger on the secret menu, one of my favorite things ever. The other stuff on there is really good too, but that takes the cake.
We also love the rooms at All Star Movies. They recently got remodeled last year, and they look amazing. Very similar to Pop Century in the style and utilizing the space really well, including Murphy beds, which again, we love. Now, All Star Movies has been completely remodeled. They have not finished the other All Stars. However, we are hoping that they're all done when everything reopens eventually.
Yeah, they were about halfway done with music when everything shut down. That includes the regular rooms at music and the family suites that we'll cover in just a minute. But I'm kind of hoping that before they reopen, they finish all of it so that they don't have to have any of the non-remodeled rooms. Either way, movies is totally done, and we love the new rooms at movies.
Oh, yeah. And the other thing we absolutely loved about this resort were the cast members themselves. So they were the most fun, crazy, amazing cast members, because every night at 11 o'clock in the food court, they did a dance party. A random, hilarious dance party where they would dance, guests were welcome to join them, and then, if you hadn't joined them by then, they would do a conga line. So you definitely had to join them through the food court.
And she says they danced. It was like choreographed dancing. They all were like line dancing to Cotton Eye Joe, and they had other songs they were dancing to, and they all had choreographed it and practiced, and they were committed to having some fun. And it was great because it's so late at night, and you're just exhausted from the parks. And it gives you one more little burst of energy before you go and crash for the night. So. And
the best part is, I did talk to a couple different managers because I really wanted to know about this dance party because no other resort does this. And I loved what the one manager told me. He said this started a couple years ago. A random group of college program kids decided to do it one night. And that basically started the entire thing. And every time a new group of college program came in, they would all learn the choreography so that they could all do it. And it just continued, and the guests loved it. We loved it. It was so much fun. And so we really just enjoyed the vibe, I guess would be the best way to say it, at All-Star Movies.
And then the last thing that's different there, I think, we got to point it out because it is All-Star Movies, is they have movies every single night, which most of the resorts do, even most of the value resorts do. But they don't have them on a big blow-up screen out underneath the stars. They have a little theater room built on the outside of the food court. So it is outside, it's open air, but it is covered, and they have the movie in there. So you get to like go to a movie premiere every night. They put up a movie poster.
Cute.
It's really cool, and it's actually really nice because you're not sitting out just in the open air. So if it's raining or something, they can still have the movie.
Yeah.
Now moving over to All-Star Music, it's the resort right there in between movies and sports. The biggest differentiator here is the fact that they have family suites, kind of like the ones over at Art of Animation. But we did not actually like these family suites at all.
Nope.
We stayed there and it felt really, really cramped when you pulled all the beds out because they had the bedroom with the queen, which is fine. But then in the living room, they had a pull-out couch that was a full-size bed. Then they had a pull-out chair that was a twin-size bed, and then they had a pull-out ottoman that like unfolded and you just took the cover off.
We had never heard of before.
It was very strange, and it was also a twin-size bed, so it was really weird to sleep 6 people like that. And when you pulled all the beds out, there was just no room to get around. No. But when they started refurbishing these rooms, we got to go do a video tour of one of them, and you can see that on their YouTube channel. It's amazing. They did such a good job there. They redid it with 2 queen-size pull-down Murphy beds now, one that goes over the couch and one that goes over the table. It's just a phenomenal use of the space. They did such a great job remodeling it. I love the family suites now. Again, we don't really have reason to stay there, and the price point's a little higher, closer to like more like a moderate or even a deluxe. But it's a really great option if you need to sleep 6 people on a budget. And we love what they've done with the space.
And it also has 2 bathrooms in there, which is really helpful when you have 6 people sharing those rooms. Yeah. So again, we just absolutely love these rooms. But one of my favorite things about All-Star Music, and he's already laughing because it's so funny, is actually, in my opinion, All-Star Music has the one location you could do a gorgeous photo shoot. And I know that sounds hilarious and you're like, what is going on? But All-Star Music has different sections. So each section is based on different music, whether it be country, jazz, but one section is called the Broadway section. It's in the standard section back in the back. So if you want a preferred room, then you won't be able to have the Broadway section, but you can always request this section. And we literally went and did a photo shoot during the day and at night because it literally looks like you're walking down Broadway. It's beautiful. They have theaters. It's completely set up. The Imagineers went above and beyond in this section, in my opinion. So if you're thinking about staying in a standard room in one of the All-Stars, I would highly recommend the Broadway section. Request there because it is beautiful. And it was incredibly quiet. There were not many people back there, so we really enjoyed that fact too.
Yeah, it's kind of tucked in the back. And I love that they have actual posters from Broadway shows out there. It was really cool to kind of see the different Disney Broadway shows. And as she mentioned, that is a standard section. But one interesting thing about the All-Stars is they're laid out in a kind of a weird way. So you could be, for example, in the standard section over at All-Star Movies and be closer to the lobby of All-Star Music than you are to the lobby of All-Star Movies. Like, it's kind of confusing. So you have to see when you check in, look on a map, see where your building is. You might actually be closer to a different All-Star resort, so it might be faster to walk over there to catch the bus versus catching the bus at your resort or getting a refill for your drink or what have you. Now, All-Star Sports is the last one on the list we need to cover. And this one, there's not a lot to talk about for it because it hasn't been refurbished yet. And there really isn't anything I feel like that sets it apart from the others. It's really cool theming. Like, I love the theming, the baseball pool and all the different things there. But it just doesn't really have anything that really sets it apart, I feel like.
The main thing that sets apart All-Star Sports from the other All-Stars is that's where you'll find a lot of groups. Now, this isn't a huge deal unless you end up behind many of the groups. For instance, if they're checking in, if they've all gone to eat at the same time, or if they're heading to the same park as you, you could end up behind a very long line of teenagers or young kids. So that's just something to be aware of. If you have the option, we would not recommend staying at All-Star Sports just because those lines can get extremely long, especially at the end of the day.
And another thing you got to be aware of is if it's especially a cheer competition, they're going to want to practice usually right outside your room early in the morning. So yeah, don't stay at All-Star Sports during any cheer competition. Before you book at All-Star Sports, the first thing you should do is check the ESPN Wide World of Sports website and see if there are any planned competitions, specifically cheer or dance, but any other competitions that are going on during your stay. Because if there are, good chance they're going to be staying at All-Star Sports and dancing outside your room early in the morning, waking you up. So.
I think we got woken up at 7 or 8 in the morning one day, which I know isn't super crazy early, but we had been in the park till like 1 o'clock in the morning, and by the time we got back to our room, it was like 2 o'clock. So we had not been asleep very long when we got woken up by cheering and excited, happy little voices very early in the morning because they were all out there practicing. So it's just something to keep in mind, especially if you have little ones. You want them to get their rest. It can be very long park days. So any sleep you get is very important for you and your children. We did get several questions about the Valley Resorts from you all on Tuesday on our social media accounts. So the first one is Pop Century the best choice for a couple without kids?
Well, it's our favorite resort, so obviously I think so. But let me tell you why I think so. I think that it's the best for couples without kids. Number one, because of the Skyliner. Which sounds a little crazy because like the Skyliner is not that big of a deal just going to the parks. But if you're a couple and you're most likely going to go out to eat, you want to go to some great restaurants, right? Well, there's some great restaurants over at Riviera and even the bar over at Caribbean Beach or Sebastian's at Caribbean Beach. Also great options, even though Sebastian's isn't open right now. Or you could go over to Crescent Lake. You could take the Skyliner all the way over to Epcot or I guess Hollywood Studios if you wanted to. Take longer to get there. But you could walk from the Skyliner to Boardwalk or Beach and Yacht Club, and there are some great options there, from Signature like Flying Fish and Yachtsman down to Trattoria Al Forno or even Beaches and Cream. Tons of food options. Otherwise, it's going to be kind of hard to get there because you got to bus to a park or bus to Disney Springs, then bus back to the resort you want to go to, and it can make transportation difficult. So I like the Skyliner access. Also, I love the fact that it has the Murphy bed, and it makes a single room look a lot bigger once you pull that bed up out of the floor and you have just the table there. So I think I would go with Pop Century for couples 100%.
I agree. And again, you don't have as many groups staying at Pop Century as you would the All-Stars. So in our opinion, Pop Century definitely would be the best option for a couple without kids.
And the next question we had was kind of similar, but not specific to couples. But what should be your determining factor if you're trying to choose between the value resorts?
Okay, so definitely transportation is a big one, especially again if you're going to end up in an all-star and behind a big group. you and your kids could end up waiting a decent amount of time just to get to the resort. And same thing, the end of the day, you're tired and now you're waiting in a very long line to wait for a bus to get back. So the Skyliner is a huge, huge benefit just because you get there so quickly and get back so quickly to Epcot and Hollywood Studios. So for that instance, it would be Art of Animation or Pop Century. Now, the pool is another determining factor if you're going to be at the resort. If you're not going to be hanging out at the resort, it really doesn't matter. But again, the big blue pool at Art of Animation,
it's pretty great.
Awesome, and all the quiet pools there. And we love the pool at Pop Century too.
We do. Now, another thing I think you have to consider too is the location of the resorts. If you're going to be going to the parks a lot or Disney Springs or even resort hopping and going to different restaurants if you're driving or renting a car or Ubering for that matter, you got to think about where it's at. So All Stars are kind of all way off on the fringe, right at the edge of property over towards like Animal Kingdom side of things. Whereas Pop Century and Art of Animation are right there, kind of right by Epcot and Hollywood Studios, which is why they have the Skyliner. So if you're looking to be more centrally located, I definitely would go Pop Century and Art of Animation. Honestly, I can't think of a reason that I would prefer the All-Stars over Pop and Art, except for maybe if you wanted just a little bit of a cheaper room, or if you had a large group of people coming and you wanted to have several rooms together and be sure you could be together.
And the last thing would be the food options. So as we mentioned, Art of Animation has the best food options in our opinion. It's got a wide variety, but Pop Century also has several different windows you can choose from, which we really like because we don't always want the same thing. So we want to have different options between the two of us. So there's something to consider before you decide where to stay is look at the food because most likely that's where you're going to be grabbing breakfast before you leave in the morning. Now, when you're at the parks, you've got lots of options there, so that's not a problem. But especially at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, you want to look and see what your options are there. Now, this is a really easy question for you, I feel like. Which Valley Resort has the best snack options?
Yep, that's a really easy question. Art of Animation, that's easy. So they all have really good snacks. They all have different themed cupcakes and stuff like that, and a lot of them are exclusive to each resort, which is convenient if you're at All Star because you can walk to the different ones and try the different snacks. But Art of Animation has gelato. They have 8 or 10 different flavors of gelato there all the time, anytime you want it. So it's going to win for me because it has that in addition to all the other snacks that everyone else already has. So that was a pretty easy choice.
Especially when it's warm out. A cupcake is nice and that's always great. But ultimately, a cupcake is a cupcake no matter what it looks like. The frosting all tastes the same.
Yeah, unless they make it grape flavored like some of them they've done in the past. Weird.
It was very strange.
Weird.
But gelato is just really nice, especially because in Florida, it's hot, you guys. You get really hot days. You want something refreshing, and gelato was really refreshing for us. So we'd go for a walk or after we go to the pool. I don't know how much gelato we had last year, Art of Animation, but it was a lot.
Way more than we should have. We actually went from Pop over to Art of Animation to get gelato pretty much every time we stayed there.
And every time we stayed at Art of Animation, we had to get gelato.
Yep.
So they got to know us a little bit there.
And then this question takes us back to last year when we stayed in all the resorts, kind of back to back with the All-Star and Pop and Art of Animation. Someone asked, how noisy are the rooms compared to the other resorts?
That's a really good question, and that is a big concern. As we mentioned, you could end up waking up very early to cheering if you're at All-Star Sports, so that's something to consider. But the rooms themselves, they can get a little noisy. You definitely want to be considerate of other people in the other rooms, and hopefully they will do the same for you. There are thin walls between the rooms, so we did notice a little bit of a noise issue there. Now, the suites at Art of Animation, the rooms are bigger, so you don't necessarily hear as much noise that way, but the hallways actually echo quite a bit. We learned that when we stayed there. So if a little kid late at night is running down the hall very excited, they got a Mickey balloon or they just had a great time, they're running down the hallway, it echoes all the way down.
You're going to hear it. You're going to hear that. But other than that, they're pretty good at absorbing the noise there. We do recommend bringing a noise machine, a white noise machine, or installing one of the apps on your phone when you're staying at a value resort. Yes. And honestly, if you're staying at any resort, it's not a bad idea to have the noise machine because we've found that even at the nicest resorts, you can still be awakened by loud noises in the room next to you or out on the balcony or out in the main lobby or wherever you're at. So it's really important to have that there if you want to make sure you get a better night's sleep, especially though in the value resorts with a little bit thinner walls.
The next question we got, which I think was a really good one, do the bus stops get crowded?
Well, I think they used to get more crowded than they do now. Because right now, with capacity being limited on the buses and the parks and everything, they're running a lot more buses to the value resorts, because you can only fit 6 parties per bus maximum right now. No matter what size the party is, they can't do anything more than 6 parties. So they're running a lot more buses through. And we were at Pop Century. We saw the buses came so frequently, especially for like Magic Kingdom, because the lines would get really long because you're distancing in the line. You're only putting 6 parties on the bus. But I will say they can still have a pretty long bus line, especially when parks are first opening, or, for example, around dinner time going over to Disney Springs, since a lot of the parks are closing early and there's not as much to do at the value resorts. People go to Disney Springs, so it gets a little busy there too. But it's not terrible. I just think it is a little bit longer of a bus wait time normally than the other resorts might be.
Now, one of the main differences at the value resorts as opposed to the moderates, there's only one bus stop. So it is something to consider. If you're in a standard room, you do have to walk all the way to the front to the bus stop. And same thing at the end of the night, you have to walk all the way back. So that's why we do prefer the preferred rooms, because it puts you closer to the front. After a long day walking all day in the parks, it's hot outside, you're tired, you just want to get to your room and just collapse and go to sleep. So even though there's one bus stop, Disney has worked really, really hard to keep the buses going. Not make those lines go really long.
And I will say too, there are standard rooms that are closer to the bus stops than preferred rooms at certain resorts. Or like I mentioned earlier, between the All-Stars, maybe a standard room at Music is closer to the All-Star Sports bus stop. But that's all luck of the draw as far as which building you get. Even if you request it, you may not get it. So we'd really rather book preferred and just know that we're going to be close to the front versus taking a chance on being at the opposite end of where we want to be. And this final question is right up your alley. Someone asked, which value resort has the best pool and why?
So, of course, I love this one because I'm all about the activities, all about the fun things at the resorts. The best pool, in my opinion, is the Big Blue Pool at Art of Animation. It is actually the largest pool on Disney property. Now, for those of you who are thinking, wait, what about Yacht and Beach Club because they have the biggest pool? Technically, theirs is considered a mini water park, and it is set in 3 different bodies of water. So Art of Animation does have the largest body of water at Walt Disney World, so they are very proud of that. They will let you know about that. We've actually found it very comical how excited they get talking about this. But yeah, so technically Art of Animation has the biggest pool on Disney property, and in our opinion, the best. We also love the quiet pools there, as we mentioned earlier. Now, if you're looking between Pop and All Stars, we prefer Pop. We really like the Hippy Dippy pool. It's just very fun, brightly colored. They have great poolside activities there. And again, his nerdy computer quiet pool that he loves. Yep. So we really do love Pop Century as far as the value resorts that aren't family suites. We hope you enjoyed this week's episode and learned something new about the value resorts you didn't know before. In next week's episode, we'll be talking about the moderate resorts at Walt Disney World. On Tuesday, over on our social media accounts, Instagram and Facebook, we'll be asking what questions you have about the moderate resorts. So be sure to head over there so we can answer those in next week's episode.
Thank you so much for joining us for this week's episode of Wishing Stars and Mickey Bars. And until next time,
we're here with the ears.